Good day, everyone, and welcome to another Live with Kevin, another episode that will eventually be another chance for us to eventually create an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad that you are here, as always, whether you're here for the first time or you've been here a lot in the past. Either way, I'm glad you're here, and I hope that if you're with us live, I know some of you won't be, but if you're with us live, open up the chat window, the comments of whatever social platform you're on, whatever it happens to be called, wherever you're watching from, and say hello. Tell us where you're located. We'd love to see that. We'll put some of those on the screen. We want you to participate in this, and one of the best ways to do that is get you used to using your fingers by typing right away. So say hello. Tell us where you're from. While you're here with my guest and I, whom I will introduce in a second, I want you to imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee. So if we were all at a table, we were having a cup of coffee, a glass of water, or whatever, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you'd offer it up, right? So please do that here, even though we're not in physical proximity. So because when you do that, it'll make for a better conversation live. It will eventually make a better podcast conversation. And, oh, by the way, you'll get more value from it for yourself. So those are all good reasons, I hope, that you find to participate and join in with us. Again, just say hello. Tell us where you are. And if you're here, I promise there's something we're doing on September the 20th and 21st of 2023 that you will love. It's something called Virtual Leader Con. You can learn more about it by going to, surprisingly, virtualleadercon.com. I'll put that on the screen here in a second. Virtualleadercon.com. Virtualleadercon.com, 2 days with experts like the one we had today. In fact, David was with us on an earlier year of this event. 2 days and a very interactive platform with plenty of chances to learn from thought leaders, as well as win some valuable prizes. And it can all be yours for free. It's our annual gift to you. I hope you'll take advantage of that. Virtualleadercon.com. Now, this is, as you can see in the top corner, also a podcast, or it will be a podcast. And so to do that, all of the stuff we've just said won't be a part of that. Makes sense, I suppose. So what I'm going to do now is do the countdown and do the introduction, and we're going to dive in. All right. So here we go. Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Teams are all around us, and few important things in our lives are achieved alone. And yet, most of us still wonder, how can I lead my team to be more effective? How can I create perhaps the best team ever? Today, you're going to get some new ideas on exactly how to do that. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could join us in the future live. And the way to do that, do live on your favorite social channel. And to do that, you can go to our Facebook page or our LinkedIn page to learn more, find out when we're doing them, etc. And that can be found by joining those groups at remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more by going to longdistanceteambook.com. At longdistanceteambook.com, you can get a free excerpt and learn plenty more about how to get the book and more. If you are a part of or leading a long-distance team, you need this book in your library and in your mind. And today, our guest is Dr. David Burkus. Let me introduce him to you as he comes back to the camera. There he is. See, I caught him standing away, so I waited just a second. David is one of the world's leading business thinkers. He's his forward-thinking ideas and business books, best-selling books, are helping leaders build their best team ever. He is the best-selling author of 4 books about business and leadership. I read all 4. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into dozens of languages. I've only read them in English. Since 2017, David has been ranked multiple times. He's one of the world's top business thought leaders. His insights on leadership and teamwork have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, USA Today, Fast Company, the Financial Times. I could go on and on. He's also been on CBS This Morning. A former business school professor, he now works with leaders from organizations across all industries, including PepsiCo, Fidelity, Adobe, and NASA. We've worked with NASA too. David, welcome back to the
Well, Thanks so much for having me back. Right. I'm excited. And yeah, I just want to right off the bat, give people that plug for Virtual LeaderCon. It's pretty awesome. Thanks for having me last year. And I'm excited to see who you bring this year.
Yeah. So here, let's see, what do we got? So far, we have Alex is in Bucharest and Eric is in Michigan. So that's like spanning the globe with the constant variety of sports. So David, the first time you were with us, we looked it up this morning. It was in May of 2017. And now this will be live on the podcast in October of 2023. So that makes us both experienced. I was going to say old. I'll just say experienced at all this.
Seasoned.
Seasoned.
Yeah.
There you go. So you've written a bunch of books. We've talked about that already. Here's the new book, Best Team Ever. Why write a book about teams? I'll put it so you can see it. Why write a book about teams? I mean, I don't mean that. I mean, there are plenty of books in the marketplace about teams, but why is it that you wanted to write about and help people think about their teams?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's sort of a why and there's also a why now, right? The why is quite simply is what I'm fascinated with. If you look at, I kind of had, when I started my career as a researcher and also working with organizations, I was kind of had intellectual ADHD where I was researching all sorts of different stuff. And eventually the through line for me, I realized it was teams, right? Whether it goes all the way back to my first book around creativity and innovation, the most highlighted passage in that entire book, according to Amazon Kindle, is creativity is a team sport, right? And it just sort of continued on through that. And that was really the focus. You and I, candidly, you and I were like the only two people when COVID hit that figured out that what we needed to focus on was long distance, remote or hybrid teams. There's already macro work on the economics and all of this sort of stuff about remote work. And there was micro work on how to be successful working from home, but everybody was ignoring that area, right? And so we both leaped in on that. And what Best Team Ever is really, it's more the why now, right? Because where we are right now is coming out of, at least I hope coming out of, this pandemic that forced a lot of knowledge workers to work remotely and work from home. Now they're back 2 or 3 days a week. I work with, I just last week was working with a banking organization where a lot of the home office staff are still hybrid and a lot of the branch managers and those teams have been essential businesses. So they were never, right? And so what I was trying to do with this, teams, I think everybody needs to know, because teams are what make the world go round, needs a refresher on that, et cetera. But the why now is really about having a location agnostic manual for people, right? Long distance team is an incredible manual for when you're staying remote. But when you're like, I have no idea where my career as a manager is going to go, that was kind of my goal, was to go, okay, well, here's some principles that are going to work, whether you're in person, whether you're hybrid, or whether you're remote. Here's some principles and activities that are going to work no matter what situation you face.
Yeah, it goes back to when we wrote Long Distance Leader. We said, and probably, although I haven't looked at lately, the most underlying line there is think leadership first, location second. Yeah. And it's more about what's this. There's way more that's the same than different. And the same is true here. And I love this. The subtitle of the book is The Surprising Science of High Performance Teams. So my question to you is there really science here? Like, talk to us about that.
Oh, you know me, I'm quite nerdy. So there is about 40 years of really solid research on what I would call team culture, right? So organizational culture is something, we've known about for a long time. And truthfully, the biggest surprise to me in this surprising science is later correlations, more recent in that 30 or 40 years, have been these correlations between how much of an employee's experience or engagement and performance is based not on the company, but the specific team, right? This was true before the pandemic, but it became even more true after, because if you think about it, your experience of work right now really is kind of jumping on Zoom or trading emails with the 1 or 2 to 3 teams that you're a part of. So the team affects that performance and that engagement far more. So yeah, we pulled together a bunch of different stuff. I mean, Anita Williams-Woolley and Amy Edmondson's work goes back probably 20 so years on teams. Then there's newer stuff like Google's Project Aristotle that we draw from, which is about 5 or 10 years old. But actually, even though it was run mostly by Google, they tapped a couple of my organizational psychology nerds friends in there. It's actually one of the better run studies on team culture ever. So yes, there is definitely science there. Now, there is also simplification, which is really kind of my strength, is getting a good idea out of the ivory tower and into the corner office. So there is I pick fights with other nerds because they think I oversimplified. But my point is usually I'm trying to simplify.
Yes, but I can make something actually happen.
Exactly. I'm trying to put a handle on this so that a leader can go take it and use it as a tool. And yeah, that might mean shaving off some of the corners, but we stay true to the science for sure.
So there's a line on page 19, which I'm not going to make you go guess. I'm just going to read it for you because it's one of those core ideas that I think that I wanted you to illuminate a little bit more. It says teams work best when they understand how each individual works best. So say just a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So there's really, since your previous question was around the science, there's really two different concepts from org psychology here at play. The first is what we call a sense of shared understanding, which is how well teams, in the book, I call it common understanding, but I'll just tell you right where the research is. If you Google shared understanding and Martine Haas and Mark Mortensen, you're going to find it. And it's really about how well do we understand what each other's work preferences are. This isn't personality. Personality testing can be great, getting to understand, but we're really interested in differences in behavior. Why does so-and-so like to write really long emails? Why does this person prefer to jump on a call, et cetera, to hash out every little thing? Those are work preferences. And what we find is that when teams make time for that sense of shared understanding each other's differences, they experience what I already referenced her once, Anita Williams-Woolley and her colleagues call collective intelligence. In other words, the performance and the intelligence of the team actually exceeds the average of the potential for performance or intelligence of individuals. So you take a group of people, you give them all IQ tests, and you average that out. If you build that shared understanding where teams actually understand the differences in individual preferences, calendars, responsiveness, et cetera, you get a higher than average intelligence from that team. Stephen Covey might have called that synergy, right? But that's what we experience. But it only happens when we have that shared understanding of people, not just roles and responsibilities. Those are important, but those are like table stakes. A shared understanding of people as well.
Yeah, I mean, just adding people just adds complexity. Until we get the shared understanding or common understanding, we're going to talk about that in a second, then we can't really start to get this collective intelligence. Anything more you want to say about this idea of collective intelligence? Clearly, I had already known I wanted to talk about it, so I put it up on the screen here. Anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, you know what? The most fascinating thing about this, if we want to start off really, really nerdy, Williams-Woolley and her colleagues have studied it multiple times. It's been replicated multiple times. And actually, the strongest correlation between, or strongest predictor of whether or not a team is going to achieve collective intelligence, how many women are on the team. Right. Not like, and it's interesting because we want to make a plug for diversity here, and that might think you lead to like a 50-50, et cetera. But no, apparently the more women, the better. Right. So the explanation for that is that when you look at the averages, women tend to have a higher, what we call social sensitivity. They have a higher ability to perceive others' emotions and read between the lines. And when people are sharing, they're more likely to make time for people to share instead of just jump in and try and offer their opinion. And that social sensitivity, that really increases that shared understanding and raises that collective intelligence. So it is trainable, right? I'm pretty bad at it. I've learned over
we got
time.
two men here having this conversation. And so, and presumably some percentage of men watching and later listening. And so those points don't get lost in it's about the women, not that it isn't about the women, but it's those behaviors and those proclivities that matter the most here.
Yeah, no, and it is, like I said, it is trainable. I spent a long period of my career after reading this research where I couldn't keep myself from jumping in. I'm also, in addition to being man, I'm loud, I'm extroverted. I have all of the wrong personality traits for social sensitivity. And so what I had to do was I would catch myself. I would still interrupt. Like I've gotten to the point now where I can sit back and let other people speak before I offer my thing. I would still interrupt. But in the process of talking, I would notice who I interrupted, and I would always apologize and cede the floor. Like that was my first trick, is I would say, blah, 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 blah. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, Judy. I totally cut you off. Can we go back to what you were saying? I want to make sure it gets heard, right? Like, so I stole the floor, but then I used the spotlight I stole to bring it back to that person. And it took years, but eventually trained myself to just stop stealing the spotlight too, and increase that social sensitivity and sharing of the teams that I'm working on.
100%. I am in that same boat often. So this book, Best Team Ever, is based around a model, and you hinted at it, and that's really where I want us to spend our time. It's a simple model with 3 basic components and some subcomponents. So why don't you tell us about the model at a high level, and then we'll dive into the pieces a little bit.
Yeah. So this is my attempt to simplify, like I was saying, about 40 years of research on teams and team culture. And when we look at all of that research and we try and find overlaps and understanding, there's essentially 3 fundamental elements, right? Sometimes I call them the best team ever model. Sometimes I call them the 3 elements of a great team culture. When I'm really being sort of nerdy, I pull from my son and I's love of the Zelda trilogy, like Zelda video games, and I call it the Triforce of team culture. But very few people get that joke because they're as nerdy as us. But anyway, if you are, let me know in the comments or email me afterwards if you're listening to the recording. And what we're looking at here is 3 elements, essentially common understanding, psychological safety, and pro-social purpose. Now, we already dove into common understanding a little bit, right? But that's that mix of that shared understanding and collective intelligence that we were talking about, which in the book I actually just refer to as empathy. And then what I call clarity. I was joking about this earlier, that knowing roles and responsibilities, having timelines and key objectives set, that's table stakes. So it's not unimportant. And this is actually where I think a lot of team books written, not yours, but others, go wrong over the last 10 years, et cetera, because we sort of over-index on the empathy. But no, we still need clarity. We still need to know what's expected of us. It's impossible to exceed expectations if you don't know what they are, right?
Well, can I just stop you right there? Because
Yeah.
I think that having worked with leaders for over 30 years and coached leaders at literally all levels, that let's just have clarity of expectations, what you just said, that like everyone will say, oh yeah, we got to be clear about expectations. And we are woefully not. Like,
yeah.
And I'll be working with a leader and they'll say, they'll have this problem, they'll have this challenge and say, do they really know what you expect? Well, I told them, I said, that's not what I asked you. Like, that is not what I asked you. What is, and I'll say this not to you, David, but to everyone listening, like, it is not in your people's job descriptions to read your mind.
Yeah.
That is not in their job description. And we assume, we think we told them, we think they can read our mind, like on and on. And this is a much bigger miss, I think, than people realize.
Yeah, I agree. I see this in 2 places. The first is with people that fancy themselves servant leaders, but are actually micromanagers trying to be servant leaders, right? So they won't tell you what they expect of you because they want to empower you. And then when you bring back what you were empowered in your own autonomy to deliver, they tear it apart.
Well, that's not,
Right. So that's the first area I see it go wrong a lot of times. And then the other is well-meaning leaders who want to be clear, and then changes happen, right? And especially in the world we live in now, that's a huge one, right? We run into changes, whether in the environment or internal, what have you, and changes sometimes change our priority list. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes the newest thing accidentally becomes the most important thing just because it's new, tyranny of the urgent, right? And what we need in that moment as leaders is to go, hey, here's what's changed. Here's what hasn't changed. And this is still our list of priorities. This is number 1, number 2, number 3. And I don't see enough leaders doing that when those changes happen. And so people just react and they end up spending a lot of time on the things that aren't all that important.
So, and it's not just me being clear with you as my team member. It's also about clarity across the team. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you've got a long distance team or if you've got a hybrid team, et cetera, people need to know how their work fits into the larger whole, right? I mean, first of all, they need to know that their work does, but that's a broader thing about purpose and what have you. But also how it fits in the larger whole and when it does. I mean, how many times, pretty much everybody watching or listening to this can think of a time where you were waiting on a deliverable from somebody on your team, and then you reached out to them and they hadn't even started it because they didn't know you needed it. Right. It happens all the time in teams where we're interdependent. We can't.
And as soon as they know that, they're all.
Yeah. But how much better would it have been if that didn't happen? Right. If we got together on a regular basis to kind of go over these things and see how our work fits with each other so that we can actually create a to-do list for everybody. And this doesn't take a lot of time. This doesn't mean teams need to constantly be on Zoom with each other or always in meetings. In fact, the best teams, we talk about this research in the book, the best teams actually have bursty communication. They come together in a short burst. They get all of this coordination stuff done. And then they give people long periods of uninterrupted time to actually do the work because they're properly synced. Because
if you're not synced, that's going to be frustrating at best. But if you are synced, it allows us to be far more productive, right? So
Yeah.
We talked about common understanding, clarity, and empathy, and you said that a lot of people have been leaning into empathy. I think that is good, and we've done a number of episodes here on the podcast about empathy, some really, really great stuff, which we will point everybody to in the show notes. But because there's plenty of stuff, Dave, that you and I can talk about, I'm going to move on. In fact, I look at the clock. I think we need to move kind of quickly. Psychological safety is also something we've talked about a lot. But what I like about what you've done is you've said, well, it's really two things under psychological safety. It's trust and respect. And the one I'd like us to talk about is respect, because what I have found over time is that partly because of different personality styles, that word to some people means different things than it does to other people. So let's take a second. What do you mean by respect here? And how do we help to build that on our team?
Yeah. And I have to say, so, the subtitle of the book, The Surprising Science, this was probably the biggest surprise for me, because I thought I knew this, right? I've met Amy a couple of times. I've interviewed her, right? Amy Edmondson, who sort of, I won't say coined the term, but who popularized this term on teams around psychological safety. She's the one that says trust and respect. But the mistake I made for a long time was assuming that trust and psychological safety are synonymous terms, and they're not. Right? If I trust the team, I'll take an interpersonal risk. I'll speak up when I disagree. I'll share something about myself and be vulnerable. I'll admit a failure. Respect is about me, the team, and especially the leader, valuing that contribution that came from trust. And if you don't do it, then I trust you less. There's a reciprocal process going here. It's a virtuous or a vicious cycle based on how we respond. And that response is what I call respect. How well are you in it, listening, honoring that person? You don't have to agree with them, but are you shooting that idea down right away? Yeah, that'll never work. We tried something similar to that before, etc. Instead of going, tell me more about that, and let's explore some of these assumptions, and let's think through this idea. We might still go with my idea, but if you don't feel heard, you don't feel respected, you don't trust me as much moving forward. And when you look at teams, we can do team building activities. We really shouldn't in terms of trust falls and those little games and what have you. We can do them, but unless we coach people on how to demonstrate respect to each other, whether that's basic stuff like active listening or summarizing what we're hearing people saying, or even just recognizing when someone's being vulnerable with us and holding space in that, right? If we don't train all of that, then all of the trust building efforts are for naught, because as soon as somebody makes a joke at someone else's expense, all of that trust we built through that expensive offsite goes out the window.
I read something online today, which I won't go into, but it was about something that happened at a wedding between the groom and the bride, and where she absolutely 100% felt disrespected.
Was it the cake smashing video on Instagram?
I didn't see a video. I did not see a video, but I read something about this. And the woman said, like, I don't want the cake smash thing. It's embarrassing. This is a long story, right? And he still does it like a joke.
Yeah.
And like, there's an annulment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a viral Instagram video of her saying, you know what, in the end, it saved me $50,000 in a divorce because we were so quick to getting married, I managed to get an annulment instead. Right.
Well,
but that's the point is what I mean. Yeah.
She trusted him, and maybe even still does, at least in some ways, but that piece was lost. And amazing. I didn't know. Now I'm going to have to go. I don't go on Instagram very often. Now I'm going to go find it on Instagram because I read it someplace else.
I bet you it's on all of them. I bet you it's on YouTube and on TikTok and all of those. But yeah, no, I was literally I was just hanging. I was on my phone waiting to go play pickleball this morning, and it popped up, and I was like, my first response was actually the opposite. My first response was like, wow, that's an awful lot to get hung up on emotionally and what have you. But then I thought about it more, and I was like, I'm willing to bet they had the conversation. You don't plan an elaborate wedding without at some point, okay, when this moment that happens happens, and she trusted him with, I would prefer
I don't want this. I literally do not want this. Like, the thing I read was written. So, yeah. And maybe it's not even the same person, right? But the point is, the story, it's instructive, because here's the other thing that's instructive about is that maybe we think she is overreacting. That's a fair opinion to have, But the fact is, the only one that matters in this case is hers. And the same thing happens in teams all the time. Like, I think that person's overreacting. I think that's not that why is that such a big deal?
Yeah.
But the only one it matters to is that person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we don't take that, then they're not feeling respected.
Yeah. Yeah. There's in the book, we tell the story of Alan Mulally turning around Ford, but one part of the story that's not in there, mostly because I forgot until I was talking to him the other day and he told me the story again, is Alan tells me the story of one of the rules for building psychological safety on the senior leadership team at Ford in order to actually find the real problems and get people comfortable admitting where they were struggling, is his rule was never a joke at someone else's expense. And there was an executive on the team who consistently was just politely ribbing people. And I get it. I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in Philly and Boston, right? So my love language is snark. I get it, right? And yet there was somebody who's constantly making jokes at other expenses. And 2 or 3 times Alan had to pull him aside. You know why this is important? I know it doesn't seem like cake in the face. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but it's a big deal. And he finally said, you need to make a decision on whether or not you think you can make this change. And the executive goes, I don't think I can. And Alan just goes, okay, that's okay. And the executive, it's okay. You mean I can continue to do that? No. You can't be a membership of this team if you don't make this change.
Okay.
But if you decide you don't want to make the change, then you're going to we'll help you find a new job. We'll place you somewhere else. We still love you, right? But you cannot act this way for that reason. And it's an amazing, I mean, Alan handles it beautifully and tells the story beautifully, but it's another example. There are so many things that you don't think are a big deal that signal disrespect to people and that diminish that sense of psychological safety.
It's the other person's perspective that matters in this case. So
Yeah.
The third part of the triangle, we've talked a little bit about common understanding. We've talked a little bit about psychological safety. The third one is what you call prosocial purpose. People might not know that word prosocial. So say a little bit more about that, and then a little bit about the 2 components here.
Yeah. So my definition of prosocial purpose is when team members have a sense that they're making a meaningful contribution toward work that benefits others. So what we're doing here is we're combining some of the research on just general intrinsic motivation and also what's known as prosocial, meaning people are wired to want to help each other. One of the strongest forms of internal or technically introjected motivation is the desire to protect and promote the well-being of other people. Right. And so if you think about a time, if you're listening to this or watching this, think about a time where you really felt like, wow, my work actually makes a difference. My work is meaningful. It's usually not when the company unveils their new mission statement, right? Or their new, their new sort of corporate propaganda video meant to energize everybody. It's usually not. It's usually when you got a thank you note from a client or a coworker, or when your boss said, thank you so much for working so hard on this because it helped us do that. It's when you felt like your work was significant, meaning it contributed to the larger whole, and that larger whole makes an impact on other people. And what's really interesting about this, we see that from an individual motivation standpoint, but we also see, and this is why I really had to use this awkwardly confusing word prosocial, when people feel that on an individual level, they're then more likely to engage in what in nerdy org psych circles we call organizational citizenship behaviors, basically helping. They're much more likely to help other people, to continue to help other people. In other words, to continue to engage in teamwork, to put we and the needs of the team over me. And so it's sort of it's like a that thing that's not possible in physics, perpetual motion machine. It's kind of like a perpetual prosocial purpose machine. When people feel that their work makes an impact, they're more likely to do work that makes an impact and more likely to be a team.
Yeah. Meaningful contribution to important work. And that idea of, I started out by saying it, you say it early in the book as well. In the introduction, I said, most everything really valuable in our lives happens in a group, in a team, not individually. Doesn't mean the individual effort isn't important. We talked about that already as well. But for us to figure that out, recognize that, and then lean into that to upward spiral, perpetual motion kind of thing about that is really very powerful. So we've talked about a number of things here. My question to you, David, would be of I'll say the 6 items, right? Clarity, empathy, trust, respect.
You just revealed the trick, right? That there's 3 items because 3 is a memorable number, but there's really 6. You just revealed my trick, Kevin. But I love it.
I'm very clear about that. It's not my first day. Anyway, so of the 6, here's the question. Mm-hmm. Which of them do you think is most misunderstood? Like all 6 of those things, people know those words. We can spell those words. We've said those words. But in the context of building effective teams, highly effective.
Yeah.
Teams,
So
which of these ideas is most misunderstood?
I think it depends on who on the team we're talking about, right? I think from a leadership perspective, the most misunderstood is that prosocial purpose element. I think leaders talk in big, grandiose terms. We spent so much time talking about how to cast a vision and get buy-in for your vision, et cetera. And what people actually want is the small scale, right? I have every thank you note ever written to me from any boss I've ever had, right? What I don't have is a copy of the company's mission, vision, and purpose and core values. I've never kept that for any company I work with, right? And I think some bosses know this, but I think a lot of them don't. Right. And so from a leadership standpoint, from an individual team member standpoint, I think it's what we were talking about earlier with that respect piece and psychological safety. I think there's definitely a lot of poor, toxic bosses that contribute to a culture of psychological safety. But I think there's also not enough talk about the respect that has to happen after the trust on individual teams. And to be totally fair, and this is why I love you and guys work so much, this is a lot harder to do remotely. Right? It's harder to actively, just think about a Zoom call, right? You're supposed to make eye contact when you're actively listening to someone. Well, if I do that, Kevin, it looks like I'm staring at my email inbox, right? I have to make a note to stare at so it's hard. It's just more difficult. It's not any less important in a virtual environment. It's just as important, but it's harder, right? So I think that's probably the area where I'm seeing laterally across a team, a lot of people either misrepresenting or just forgetting to do the work of demonstrating respect to each other.
So I think you also really, in a way, answered my next question, but I'll ask it in case there's something else you want to say. So I said, which of them is most misunderstood and which is most often missing?
Yeah.
So you want to add you kind of said both, but anything you want to add to that? Which is most often missing?
Yeah, no. So for most often missing, I would definitely pick the psychological safety piece. I mean, we are thankfully, I think, at where we're having a decent amount of conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet we've already figured out that we have to add this word belonging. And truthfully, I don't. Like, if I could wave a magic, not that I, as a middle-aged white guy from the middle of the country, I probably shouldn't be offering anyone in this space advice. But if you ever wanted to hear mine, it would be this. Let's just talk about psychological safety. I mean, we see this in a myriad of different studies that diversity without safety is anarchy. Diverse teams without psychological safety actually underperform homogenous teams, right? But with psychological safety, they overperform even homogenous teams with psychological safety, right? So that kind of needs to be our focus. And I think we're taking the first part more seriously than we've ever had, which is knowing that we need to increase diversity. We want people to bring their whole selves to work. We want the diversity of opinions and lived experiences, what have you. But if we get that without doing the work of building psychological safety, we're not going to get what we wanted out of this deal.
Right. I think that's exactly right. So I'm going to shift gears before we finish. I'm looking at the clock here. So what do you do, David, for fun? You mentioned pickleball. Is that your thing? Like, what do you do for fun, David?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of my thing. So for the last 17 years, I've trained in, competed in, now sort of coached and teach in the esoteric martial art called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But as you get older, it gets harder and harder to do that one. And it's actually my wife that picked up pickleball one day at the gym. And so it's really become when I'm at home, when I'm not on the road at a speaking engagement or working with a client or something like that, and she's off, she's an ER doctor, so she works a crazy schedule. But if she's off during the week, that's sort of become our thing to go and do. It's funny. I guess the answer is, what do I do for fun? I spend time with my wife, right? And I spend time with my kids. We just happen to do that.
That's a gold star. That's
right.
Good.
Right. But it's funny. She's full on addicted. And we all know those people that are full. At this point, it's fastest growing sport in North America. We all know people that got addicted to pickleball. She's definitely that. I'm just addicted to her. And so if she ever stopped playing it, I'd probably give it up and go back to the mats on jiu-jitsu anyway.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I know we share in common is that we are voracious readers. What's something you're reading these days or you've read recently?
Yeah. So ironically, I mean, not to just go right back to where we were, but I'm in the midst of this book called The Psychological Safety Playbook. I think Amy's work is amazing on the research side, but I'm always looking for more and more ways to train and teach teams on how to do it. And that's essentially what it is. It's just a playbook. It's this activity or this activity or this activity, or remember to do this thing. And so I really like the action orientation of it. It also helps that there's lots of pictures and drawings, which is something academic work really lacks. So,
And oh, by the way, the Psychological Safety Playbook she's been a guest on this
awesome.
podcast. So we'll make sure we have a link to that so people can check that out.
Yeah, no, it's great. Now I just wish there was a common understanding playbook and a prosocial purpose playbook, and then I'd be good to go. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, that's me telling myself to get on it. Yeah.
So now, David, the question you've wanted me to most ask since the beginning, like, where can we learn more? Where do you want to point people? How can they connect with you? All of that stuff. I'll hold up the book while you do that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I'm really fortunate. I've got a really weird last name. David Burkus, Burkus is really odd. So you could go straight to davidburkus.com if you wanted to, but if you forget that and you just type that into Google, you'll find me because I got to steal all of the usernames. So we're on LinkedIn, YouTube. We're even on TikTok, although I don't dance. But I do post clips from keynotes and things that can be useful to you there. So whatever social media platform you want to engage with me on, and I hope you will, because this is a conversation that's not going away anytime soon. Team culture is not going to magically stop affecting team performance, right? And so let's keep that conversation going.
So David, thanks for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you, as I expected that it would be. And I love the book. I think it's my favorite of your books. Not that you care, really. I mean, at the end of the day, but to all of you, if this is your first introduction to David, obviously you've gotten some sense of this book. This is where I would start with David's work, in my personal opinion. And so now I have a question for all of you who are watching and listening. Here it is. Now what? I ask you this every week. So if you've been with me before, you know I'm going to ask, but the question is the same because it's a powerful question. What are you going to do with what you just heard? What action will you take? Maybe you got some idea to think about the difference between trust and respect, and there's something you're going to do with that. Maybe there's something that you heard that you can immediately implement with a team member. Maybe you're reminded because of David's story that you need to be careful when you interrupt. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you pick something and then you go take action on it, because until you take action on it, this was just entertainment. And at the end of the day, you could probably done a better job when it came to entertainment. David, thanks again so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I highly encourage you to connect with David on LinkedIn. You do the same with me. We both have names that are easy to remember, if hard to spell. David Burkus and Kevin Eikenberry. Go connect with either or both of us on LinkedIn. We would love that. And I will say this to all of you. We will be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Hope you'll join us. Make sure you, give us some stars, tell someone else to come join us, do all those things, and come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.